And they said that for a reason, because impeachment is basically a political death warrant. And so they didn't approach this thing in a cavalier way in terms of either the evidence, the theory that you're advocating, or the law that you're following. And unfortunately, this process doesn't hold up to the smell test.
This is the way Mark Meadows framed what they did hear from that witness yesterday.
He's an outstanding witness for our side, and I think what I said earlier today is it was if the Democrats were sucking lemons, the more he testified, the more they puckered up with their lips, where they started to look at this, and they couldn't believe what they were hearing. You can't have an impeachable offense if there wasn't a deliverable. And so hour after hour today, it got worse and worse for my Democrat colleagues.
Process will now continue, Guy, and we're going to see likely public hearings in the coming weeks, more witnesses called forth. What are your expectations over what the days and weeks to come look like?
So, Sandra, about 8 witnesses, I think, are on the list for next week, and they're still trying to work these rules out. The document that was passed yesterday gives Adam Schiff, in essence, the lead prosecutor, almost unfettered power in terms of what information gets released, what documents get subpoenaed, what witnesses get subpoenaed. And the problem with that, fundamentally, the problem is one of fairness. The American people, who are the juries here in terms of impeachment, the Senate, who will also be listening closely, who will, if it gets this far, they try this case, the American people are focused on fairness. Is it fair? Is the process fair? And listen, I've tried a lot of cases as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. I've seen juries acquit over and over and over again when they perceive the process is not fair.
You know, I was listening to Steve Scalise from Louisiana this morning, and the congressman was making the point that even if this does go to judiciary, that there's veto power by the chairman there. So what ultimate powers does this give the president when you're talking about fairness and what he and his team will and will not be able to do?
Well, I think that's why you're seeing the president really aggressively defend this thing. And frankly, I think they need to focus on exactly what Tim Morrison said yesterday in the hearing. There was nothing. There were dozens of people on this call listening, and there was nothing illegal discussed. There was not a bribe. This was not a quid pro quo. This was nothing more than the president saying, hey, I'm concerned about corruption, and I think you need to investigate corruption. And oh, by the way, just because your last name's Biden, that doesn't give you some kind of get out of jail free card so you can do whatever you want, walk away, and not worry about the consequences.
Talking about the unprecedented nature of what we saw as far as this vote yesterday, Guy, if you throw up the numbers on the screen of the vote, you saw that none of the 194 House Republicans voted in favor of this resolution to formalize the impeachment inquiry. You go back to the Nixon days, and for the same process, 177 Republicans voted then in favor of the impeachment investigation, or supported the impeachment investigation. Clinton days, 31 Democrats broke with the president to support the impeachment investigation. So you look at the fact that not even one of those 194 Republicans. What does that tell you about the precedent and the historical precedent that we are seeing for this?
As a trial lawyer, as a former prosecutor, that tells me that facts matter. Facts matter. If I don't have the facts on my side as a prosecutor, I didn't go forward. If I knew at the very outset, before I even indicted and tried to prosecute the case, that the jury was going to acquit, I didn't do it just as a show trial. I actually went back and looked at carefully, thoughtfully at the facts, and am I on the right page here? And ultimately, what it tells me, and I think ultimately what it'll tell the American people, is that this really is about politics, and it's not about a legitimate impeachment.
All right, Guy Lewis, good to get your take on things this morning. We're going to have reaction, obviously.
Yes.
Gila, what's your best contact within the U.S. government? Is it an appeal to the State Department, or do you go higher than that to the White House?
Right now, I'm asking for President Trump to join us in this fight. I know he is aware of the corruption going on in Lebanon. I know if he can fight with us, he can bring my dad back home to his family and to the country he loves.
Well, what message would he have to President Trump to try and gain his release? We have a picture here that shows the two men together. I think it was 3 years ago, perhaps in New Hampshire.
Yes.
On the campaign of 2016. How'd that come about?
Yes. Yeah, he is a supporter for President Trump right when President Trump was a candidate for the presidency. And he loves and supports him fully. And we ask right now President Trump to help us bring him home.
How you doing, Celine?
Well, at this point, I'm very concerned about his health. And we really need to get him back here as soon as possible. We call on the president to take a lead on this. We definitely thank Senator Shaheen for supporting in this case from day one, but we really need the president to get involved at this time in order to make sure he gets back as soon as possible.
Yeah, thank you. I'm about out of time here. And Gila, how are you doing quickly?
I'm not doing good. My dad lost over 40 pounds in less than 2 months. The last time we talked to him, he started crying on the phone. I want him back here with us before Thanksgiving. I'm begging for anyone who can help, and specifically President Trump, to take the lead on this.
Thank you, ladies. Let's hope for the best. Maybe Thanksgiving will be a good gift then. Thank you for telling your story, who you will meet in a moment. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. Huge week on the Hill. The resolution authorizing the impeachment inquiry passes with zero support from Republicans. And this is the poll, Sandra, that we just mentioned.
A new poll showing a majority of voters oppose impeachment and removal in 6 battleground states: Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Florida. Critical states in the election just a year away.
So we got a jam-packed hour coming right at you right now. Team Fox coverage. The A-team straight ahead. They are on standby. But first, Mike Emanuel kicks it off live on the Hill. Hey, Mike, good morning.
Bill, Sandra, good morning to you. Fascinating, in that new Siena poll of 6 battleground states, voters there do support the House impeachment inquiry. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. The poll says across those 6 states, by 52 to 44, voters back this impeachment probe. The closest is Florida, where it's 49 to 44 in favor of at least investigating the whistleblower complaint. The pollster notes the significance because those 6 states could potentially decide next year's election. Meanwhile, here on Capitol Hill, the resolution in the House to set the procedures heading into a more public phase of the impeachment probe passed yesterday without a single Republican vote. It was 232 to 196, with Democrats and 1 independent voting in favor. Leading Republicans say the new rules are not fair to President Trump and the GOP.
If it goes to the Judiciary Committee, the chairman still has full discretion to deny, to veto witnesses. Veto power by the chairman never has happened before. Didn't happen under Clinton, didn't happen under Nixon.
House Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff responded to that criticism that Democrats could block witnesses that Republicans want.
We have concerns that they're going to propose a bunch of witnesses that have no bearing, that they can use merely to smear the president's opponents or for other improper purposes. It's important to note that, to the contrary of what they have been saying, in both Clinton and the Nixon impeachments, the minority did not have the right to call witnesses on their own unilaterally.
The latest closed-door deposition was Tim Morrison, who was on President Trump's call with Ukraine's president, a Russia expert on the National Security Council, who told lawmakers, quote, "I want to be clear, I was not concerned that anything illegal was discussed. To the best of my recollection, the MEMCOM, memorandum of the conversation, accurately and completely reflects the substance of the call." Now, to be fair, those quotes are from the opening statement. We do not know the nature of his hours of testimony. Bill, Sandra?
Thank you, Mike. Mike Emanuel watching it from the Hill. Thank you, sir.
Let's bring in the A-team. Fox political analyst Juan Williams is here. David Asman, anchor of Bulls and Bears on the Fox Business Network, and chief national correspondent Ed Henry. I feel like I'm sitting up fight night or something.
Let's go.
I mean, it's Friday. You guys were chumming it up in the green room.
I went to Siena. Go Saints.
All right, go Saints. Want to start things off here. How do you think the day went yesterday?
Well, I think the day went well for Democrats who felt that, you know what, only 2 of the Democrats varied from support for the impeachment inquiry. For Republicans, it was total unity and total opposition to the inquiry. But I think the argument, the larger argument, Sandra, is Democrats saying you wanted an open inquiry. You wanted public testimony. You wanted a process put in place that gave the president some protections. He has now the similar protections to what we saw afforded to President Clinton in his impeachment inquiry.
Does he?
Yes. And you saw also now that it's very clear that intelligence and Adam Schiff will conduct the public hearing part and then send the report to judiciary where they will file the actual amendments.
David, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, while Nancy Pelosi was talking about now it's a totally open process, there was a closed-door meeting with Tim Morrison from the NSC, at which none of the representatives of the president were allowed to be there. This is totally unlike what it was during the Ken Starr process or leading up to the impeachment of Bill Clinton. So, and you also, by the way, had, in terms of whether it was a good day for Democrats, you had Tim Morrison, who a lot of Democrats were salivating about his testimony, saying that he was going to say something that was going to indict the president, coming out and saying, I want to be clear, I was not concerned that anything illegal was discussed. So this is evidence of high crimes and misdemeanor? I don't think it was a good day for Democrats.
I think my colleagues both make good points, which is Juan is right that the Republicans got what they wanted, allegedly. They kept saying this is not transparent. We want it out in the open. So let's see the public hearings, and let's see whether the president's account holds up. Remember, the president said the phone call was perfect. Let's see what the testimony has been behind closed doors as to whether that holds up and passes the smell test after all this. But David is right that meanwhile, it still goes on behind closed doors. And we're hearing wildly divergent accounts. Democrats saying that Tim Morrison was awful for the president. He's now resigning because he was opposed to what was happening on Ukraine. And then Republicans...
Tim Morrison himself, by the way, denied that. He said, I didn't resign because of the testimony. And then
Tim Morrison, we've got Republicans coming out of this same meeting with Tim Morrison, the same testimony, saying he said there wasn't really a whole lot wrong here. And so the very bottom line is, let's finally get it out in the public domain. And if the Democrats want to say these rules of the road are so good, why did it take 5 weeks to get them out there? Why were they doing all of this in virtual secret for 5 weeks?
Well, I think
this is the good
answer
plan.
is pretty obvious that you have to start an inquiry in a way that allows people to testify without saying, oh, I heard this from a previous witness, or allow people, especially the politicians, not to showboat for cameras. Let's get the facts in place. Let's put that on the record. Now you have the opportunity for the public to hear.
I think the answer, by the way, is 2 words: Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler was not seen as handling it well in a public hearing. Nancy Pelosi saw that. Most Democrats saw that, and they wanted Adam Schiff to have complete control of a secret process in which they would get out only the information they wanted to get out.
I think the most remarkable number yesterday was 194-0. All Republicans voting in lockstep. Even you had Francis Rooney, the retiring congressman from Southwest Florida, who said he would support, on some measure, going forward with impeachment. He held the line as well. And I think if you're the White House and looking at that, you're thinking that's the best card I have to play right now.
Well, sure, and also because Kevin McCarthy came out, and among his statements was the president did nothing impeachable or something to that effect. He didn't quite say the president did absolutely nothing wrong or that everything is perfect here on the phone call and what led up to the aid going to Ukraine and all that. But it's not reaching the level of high crimes and misdemeanors according to the Republicans, not just in the House, but in the Senate.
To that point, did you hear John Ratcliffe last hour? He's been in a lot of these interviews and depositions. His point is they're not arguing a crime was committed. They're arguing policy disputes within the administration.
Policy and style.
Now, if that is what is brought out in the public hearing, how are the American people going to react to that?
I think the American people will say this is a political process, and we're going to reach a political judgment about whether, in fact, this president abused his powers of office in order to get dirt on a political opponent by leveraging American military aid to Ukraine.
But Juan, what do you say that
if you don't give me this aid, you're not getting meetings at the White House, and you're not getting the money to defend yourself against Russian incursions. I think that's why in those polls that you guys were citing this morning,
go back to the public support of this.
You see the public support, even in those swing districts that you cited, is strong for an inquiry. People want to know the facts. It's not that they're opposed to an inquiry. At this juncture, there's also rising support for impeachment in those very
majority in
districts.
those key 6 states, this is a New York Times poll, a majority do oppose this in Arizona, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They oppose impeachment
and
or removal.
Not an inquiry, Sandra. And I think it's important for our audience to be clear with them that this, in fact, in those very states, people support an inquiry. And overall, let's go overall.
Can I just say,
hang on a second. Overall, in this country, There is right now close to a 10-point support for impeachment.
I would just quote a Democratic congressman, Dan Kildee, who I think you respect as a
was on this program earlier this week, yeah.
And I had him on Saturday, and I asked him, I said, what are your concerns? He was in Flint, Michigan, the heartland of the U.S. I said, what do the people, your constituents, think of this? And I'm going to quote him. He said, honestly, here in my hometown of Flint right now, most folks sort of cheering the fact that yesterday the UAW ratified the agreement, ended the strike. That's what people talk about around here. They don't really talk so much about the issue of impeachment. Bottom line is most Americans don't really care. They're not obsessed with it the way Beltway animals are.
To that point, David Brooks in the New York Times talks about exactly that. If you live in Washington, D.C., you'd think it's all but a done deal. If you live out in the rest of the 49 other states, District of Columbia, you're looking at with very different eyes. Number one, guys, Colin Peterson, Democrat, Northern Minnesota. Here's this quote voting against the resolution from yesterday. This impeachment process continues to be hopelessly partisan. I have some serious concerns with the way the closed-door depositions were run, and I'm skeptical that we will have a process that's open, transparent, and fair. You read that, Ed Henry, you're calling politics for the White House. What do? You go to Northern Minnesota and have a rally, probably.
Right. The president came close to winning Minnesota last time, to your point, and had a rally there just a couple of weeks ago. And I think adding to that, another Democrat named Nancy Pelosi had quotes not too long ago saying you can't move forward on impeachment unless it's bipartisan. Right. They do not have that bipartisan backing.
But something changed. And what changed is I think a lot of the moderate Democrats from districts that were won by Trump suddenly said, you know what, we can live with this. And in fact, we support this.
An inquiry,
so you
which,
only
as you said earlier.
Yes, I'm just, because I just wanted to be clear. I was talking to Sandra before about the polling, that there is support even in those districts that states you were citing for an inquiry.
I was
and
trying
think that's what
to
you're
let
seeing.
you know that poll was up on the screen as well, but you wouldn't let me in.
Well, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being stopped.
So to your point, all right, I'm going to change the topic now, and I'm going to talk about Elizabeth Warren's $52 trillion price tag on her health care plan. She released the details of it over 10 years. That's the cost, and that's a lot of zeros, Ed Henry.
Everett Dirksen, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, right? That's all. I mean, now we're talking $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. And this is higher price tag than what Bernie Sanders, I think, by $20 trillion.
And he admits that taxes will have to go up.
He's in the 30 trillions. She's at 52 trillion, and she swears the middle class won't feel it. Are you kidding me?
Even at the low $30 trillion figure, it's very simple. You just do the math, and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a very nonpartisan committee, did the math. They said it's impossible to pay for it no matter how much more you increase taxes on the rich. A 100% tax on everybody making over $200,000 a year would not pay for the lower cost $30 trillion plan. You can only do it by massive tax increases on the middle class. It's the only way. A 42% value-added tax, for example, doubling everything you buy.
How's she going to go ahead and get around explaining that?
I don't think, she can. I mean, and one of the people who is going to be arguing against her and her bad math and all of this is Joe Biden. I mean, and Joe Biden and whatever moderate Democrats are left running for president, because they see this is going to be an albatross around her neck going into not only the election itself if she becomes the nominee, but before that, because I think she's going to get beat up a lot by her fellow Democrats.
So I think to be fair to Elizabeth Warren, there are two things to be said. One is Republicans don't have any plan for dealing with the current high cost of health care in the country. And she's arguing that, in fact, with her plan, most of this burden would go on people who make more than $50 million in assets that would be pennies on the dollar, but it would pay off most of this. And it would lower deductions and premiums for most Americans in a way that would counter the effects of any slight increase in middle-class taxes. I think that's what you're going to hear.
Are you going to take health care away from 160 million Americans to get it through their employer? I'm pretty happy with it.
I think people are going to be very discomforted by that. But again, her argument is you're going to end up paying less for your health care and better health care as a result.
Very simple. Can't be done.
The White House responded a few minutes ago on FBN talking to Stu Varney. Larry Kudlow said this.
In this idea of Medicare for all and the so-called Green New Deal and other proposals I've heard, I don't want to get into politics. On policy grounds, this would have a devastating, catastrophic effect, would probably take out as much as 15 to 20% of our entire GDP. These numbers run upwards of $100 trillion, and let's get really serious about this.
White House making the case that this would destroy the U.S. economy as we know it today. Can she win on this?
No, and again, the point is, I don't think she's going to make it to the nomination, through the nomination process, if she really hangs her hat on this. At some point, she's going to have to recognize numbers. The other thing is, I don't care about the federal government budget deficit as much as a lot of my fellow conservatives do. On the other hand, what would this do to the deficit? How would she, this much money taken out of what the federal government is paying for right now means you'd have to get rid of the Department of Defense. You'd have to get rid of all of the Social Security programs we have just to pay for the health care.
Well, you know what they're going to do, David? They're going to take it out of Easy Ed's payback.
Well, that's true. I hadn't considered that. I had not considered that.
We haven't even gotten to the Green New Deal, right? Okay,
Right.
So that's going to cost trillions as well.
Like you say, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Eventually, it adds up.
It's real money. Even Juan would admit that. But here's the bottom line. You game this out. We're talking impeachment. And Nancy Pelosi just a few months ago, after saying, oh, you can't go this far, you know, holding back. Now the left is going all in on impeachment. Probably not going to be able to remove the president from office. And then you look at what's happening on the campaign trail. 32 trillion, 52 trillion. The man who's watching maybe and enjoying all this is President Trump, because he may be somebody who's impeached in the House but not removed from office in the Senate, and then has a nominee, whoever it is, Warren or someone else, with plans that are so far left that he can cobble together the math again.
He will tar people. He'll say, you're a communist, you're a socialist. But I just listened to this conversation this morning and I think, wow, deficits have exploded under this president. Exploded in a way that conservatives, David, you say you're a conservative.
Why have deficits?
Cuts,
No.
Tax
spending.
cuts.
Revenue has increased.
But the point is,
it's all because of spending.
The point is, for years under Obama, the conservative mantra was deficits matter. Why are we spending? Why is the government spending money, tax and spend?
I don't think they should.
And the second point I would say is, Americans say the #1 issue is health care, and Republicans have no plans except to badmouth people who come up with ideas.
I agree with you that the president should finally put a plan on the table. He's talked about this for a long time and has not really put a clear health plan.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But he has a big room to run between Obamacare and $52 trillion of Medicare for all.
A lot of road out there. All right, gentlemen, last topic here. Here we go, Washington Examiner. Fireside chat on live television. Trump says he wants to read the Ukraine call transcript to the American people. How would that sound? My fellow Americans, good evening.
I have no idea who would broadcast. It'd be very interesting to see if the networks pick it up. Do you think the networks would pick it up?
Everyone would.
Okay, all right. I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Both of my colleagues think the network would cover it.
Are you kidding? The Comedy Channel needs the content.
Oh, here we go.
Please. Yeah. You know, the bottom line is that we
reaffirm their decision. Okay, but Barr is looking at this. Barr, FBI, the IG, he came out at the time and said he was astonished and that he said that these agencies were looking. But we haven't got that report. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors with the FBI. And I am hopeful, among others, that at some point we're going to get answers from the FBI.
And for the first time, we got to look at some of those pictures from the autopsy report. But Dr. Bodden really, changing the story here with this week. He went on Hannity last night really talking about the difference in how those bones were broken and what that told him. Here's Dr. Bodden.
Yep.
I attended the autopsy, spoke with the medical examiner doing the autopsy, and noticed with her that there were some unusual injuries for a person who was described as having committed suicide by hanging. There were extensive forceful damage to his neck organs.
There was always questions about that, even initially, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, timing is questionable. Why is it coming out now? We have been talking about this over the last couple months, though. We have. And again, those facts are not disputed. In fact, the ME found the same thing.
The medical examiner.
The New York medical examiner.
Put a fine point on this, David. And you're right about what Bodden said. His words, he's casting doubt on the conclusion.
Correct.
He's not saying someone killed Epstein.
Right. He's also saying that when he was there at the autopsy, that the chief medical examiner that was responsible did not come to a conclusion. Said that it was open and he questions what evidence was found. He also says that there's plenty of other.
Yesterday, the Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu pushing Turkey to follow through on its promise to establish a safe zone near the Syria-Turkey border and allow mainly Kurdish forces to withdraw. Turkey considers the Kurds a security threat. It attacked them 3 weeks ago in Syria as the U.S. withdrew its troops from the area. The U.S. has worked with Kurdish fighters to attack ISIS, and the Trump administration has now deployed American forces to eastern Syria to protect oil fields there. Turkey's defense ministry also announced that it captured 18 Syrian government fighters. There are reports that they have now turned those Syrian fighters over to Russia, really demonstrating that there are several armed factions fighting in this space.
So ISIS has announced a new leader. What do we know about that message?
Well, we do not know his name. We do not know much about him. We don't know his real name. We know what his fighting name is. This is, of course, days after the United States killed the former ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So the Islamic State announced that Abu Ibrahim al-Shahemi al-Qurashi as its new leader. Analysts say in choosing that name, he's suggesting he's a descendant of the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, which would allow him to rule an Islamic State, according to ISIS. In announcing Baghdadi's death, ISIS said, "America, do not be happy." But the State Department has said in killing Baghdadi, the U.S. has added or taken another ISIS leader off the battlefield, and that campaign will continue. Bill?
Rich, thank you. Rich Edson, State Department, watching that. Thank you, sir.
This is a sad thing for a country. We do this prayerfully, with great seriousness. No decision has been made to impeach. That's what the inquiry is about. But how we go forward is a test for us to do so worthy of the Constitution, worthy of our founders' sacrifice when they established this Constitution.
That's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi following yesterday's big vote to formalize moving forward with the impeachment inquiry. Yesterday's resolution setting up rules as the investigation moves on, clearing the way for public hearings. Let's bring in our headliner. Delaware Senator Chris Coons is a Democrat on the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. Senator, good morning to you and welcome. It was a big day yesterday. Good morning, sir. And the response we've heard from Republicans they're concerned that the president's not going to get a fair shake in this process. Will he?
Well, Sandra, what I think was important about yesterday's vote in the House was it signals the end of the private phase where there were hearings going on where both Republicans and Democrats were present, but the public didn't know what was being done, who was being heard, what was being said. This will now move to a public impeachment investigation where there are going to be due process protections for the president, as well as, obviously, accountability for the public. This is very similar to how any civil or criminal trial is conducted in the United States, where the grand jury initially investigates in private, then decides whether to proceed with an indictment. And if they do, then the actual trial is held in public. That's the phase the House is now moving to. One of the things I find a little frustrating at times, Sandra, is that we continue to work in the Senate on the people's business, taking up and moving bills. But frankly, impeachment is drowning out everything else that's happening in Washington.
Yeah, how much concern
and I'm concerned at how divided it is.
Right, and on that point, too, when you talk about the division, the vote was stunning. When you look at the partisan lines that were drawn, even one of the two Democrats who voted no pointed that out in the statement that he delivered from the state of Minnesota. When you look at that, sir, and think about 1998, where 31 Democrats voted with Republicans for the inquiry approval, and you received none of that yesterday. What does that tell you about this process and how people Bill, in the American public will perceive it?
Bill, I think the challenge that the House now faces is what Speaker Pelosi was just addressing, which is they have to conduct this straight down the line as a fair and open investigative process. And if the House ultimately votes articles of impeachment, as you know, that'll come over to the Senate, where we will sit as if a jury in an impeachment trial. So I'll be careful about how I comment on it. But I think it's in the best interest of everyone in the country.
And they said that for a reason, because impeachment is basically is a political death warrant. And so they didn't approach this thing in a cavalier way in terms of either the evidence, the theory that you're advocating, or the law that you're following. And unfortunately, this process doesn't hold up to the smell test.
This is the way Mark Meadows framed what they did hear from that witness yesterday.
He's an outstanding witness for our side, and I think what I said earlier today is it was if the Democrats were sucking lemons. The more he testified, the more they puckered up with their lips, where they started to look at this, and they couldn't believe what they were hearing. You can't have an impeachable offense if there wasn't a deliverable. And so hour after hour today, it got worse and worse for my Democrat colleagues.
Process will now continue, Guy, and we're going to see likely public hearings in the coming weeks, more witnesses called forth. What are your expectations over what the days and weeks to come look like?
So, Sandra, about 8 witnesses, I think, are on the list for next week, and they're still trying to work these rules out. The document that was passed yesterday gives Adam Schiff, in essence, the lead prosecutor, almost unfettered power in terms of what information gets released, what documents get subpoenaed, what witnesses get subpoenaed. And the problem with that, fundamentally, the problem is one of fairness. The American people, who are the juries here in terms of impeachment, the Senate, who will also be listening closely, who will, if it gets this far, they try this case, the American people are focused on fairness. Is it fair? Is the process fair? And listen, I've tried a lot of cases as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. I've seen juries acquit over and over and over again when they perceive the process is not fair.
You know, I was listening to Steve Scalise from Louisiana this morning, and the congressman was making the point that even if this does go to judiciary, that there's veto power by the chairman there. So what ultimate powers does this give the president when you're talking about fairness and what he and his team will and will not be able to do?
Well, I think that's why you're seeing the president really aggressively defend this thing. And frankly, I think they need to focus on exactly what Tim Morrison said yesterday in the hearing. There was nothing. There were dozens of people on this call listening, and there was nothing illegal discussed. There was not a bribe. This was not a quid pro quo. This was nothing more than the president saying, hey, I'm concerned about corruption, and I think you need to investigate corruption. And oh, by the way, just because your last name's Biden, that doesn't give you some kind of get out of jail free card so you can do whatever you want, walk away, and not worry about the consequences.
Talking about the unprecedented nature of what we saw as far as this vote yesterday, Guy, if you throw up the numbers on the screen of the vote, you saw that none of the 194 House Republicans voted in favor of this resolution to formalize the impeachment inquiry. You go back to the Nixon days, and for the same process, 177 Republicans voted then in favor of the impeachment investigation, or supported the impeachment investigation. Clinton days, 31 Democrats broke with the president to support the impeachment investigation. So you look at the fact that not even one of those 194 Republicans. What does that tell you about the precedent and the historical precedent that we are seeing for this?
As a trial lawyer, as a former prosecutor, that tells me that facts matter. Facts matter. If I don't have the facts on my side as a prosecutor, I didn't go forward. If I knew at the very outset, before I even indicted and tried to prosecute the case, that the jury was going to acquit, I didn't do it just as a show trial. I actually went back and looked at carefully, thoughtfully at the facts, and am I on the right page here? And ultimately, what it tells me, and I think ultimately what it'll tell the American people, is that this really is about politics, and it's not about a legitimate impeachment.
All right, Guy Lewis, good to get your take on things this morning. We're going to have reaction, obviously.
Yes.
Gila, what's your best contact within the U.S. government? Is it an appeal to the State Department, or do you go higher than that to the White House?
Right now, I'm asking for President Trump to join us in this fight. I know he is aware of the corruption going on in Lebanon. I know if he can fight with us, he can bring my dad back home to his family and to the country he loves.
Well, what message would he have?